Thank you, Lincoln.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Those were some great pictures on that hike. I was envious that I wasn't on the hike.
It was an
beautiful out here.
Extraordinary experience.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Chris, you have been in the banking industry for over 30 years.
Yep.
And you have seen markets come and go. You've seen the ups and downs. Can you help us understand, from your perspective, what does this macroeconomic landscape look like for each of us?
Yeah. So I probably have a different perspective than most people. By the way, anytime that everyone thinks that there's going to be, for example, a soft landing, I think all of us should be a little skeptical and sort of asking ourselves, if everyone thinks it's going to play out this way, why do they all think the same thing? Here's kind of what I see in the economy right now. We had a CPI print today, which kind of reinforces my thesis that I'm not sure inflation is completely under control. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think what we're going to see is the economy is going to continue to grow at 2.3, 2.5%. People talk about, well, is it going to be a hard landing? Is it going to be a soft landing? I think there's a reasonable chance that there's no landing. Eventually we'll have I don't know if it's going to be soft or hard. Everything's a cycle. This will be no different than any other. But I just think it's really difficult to keep inflation under control when the labor market hasn't been damaged. And all of you are in business every day. What I'm experiencing is we're certainly not paying people any less today than we were a year ago. As we recruit people, I think the market is as hot as it's ever been. As it relates to the consumer, we have kind of an interesting look into the consumer. As you correctly mentioned, Lincoln, we have 3.5 million customers. Those 3.5 million customers have more money in their accounts today, the non-interest-bearing accounts, than they did pre-pandemic. And so, is it as much as it used to be? No. Is the economy slowing down? Clearly. But this whole notion that we've got inflation under control, I'm just not sure of. If I look at our data from our credit cards, the spend, all of you probably traveled to get here. You walk through an airport, the airports are packed. Every seat on every plane is sold for $1,000, it seems to me. And then there's tons of stimulus. One of the things that I think people are missing in terms of kind of looking forward and thinking that we have inflation under control is, there was a tremendous amount of stimulus, and the stimulus is kind of in three buckets right now. It's the stimulus that's been allocated and spent, the stimulus that's been allocated and unspent, the stimulus that hasn't even been allocated, and then as you follow, in case you guys haven't heard, we've got an election coming up. In this election, if you hear the two candidates speak, each of them, it's almost a contest of how much money they can spend. And they spend it in the form of either cutting taxes or some kind of spending. So all that being said, the economy is in good shape. Our customers are doing well. I think the economy is going to continue to grow. If we get a soft landing, obviously we're well positioned for that. That'll be wonderful. But I think all of us as business people, it's not a zero possibility at all that we might see inflation start to tick up again, all of which would mean these interest rates, particularly long rates, the 10 years, probably all of you know, is around 4%. I don't see the terminal rate of the 10-year being that much below 4%. So that's kind of a around the horn, Lincoln, of what I'm seeing. I feel good about the economy, though. I'm out talking to our customers. I'll be talking to our customers all day today. People are doing well. Their balance sheets are in good shape. I'm not worried about credit at all. People talk about, which is pretty amazing. If you think about the biggest hiking cycle in 44 years, most people borrow on a variable rate basis, most businesses, that is. I feel good about the economy. I don't think necessarily we get the soft landing, but that's okay. And eventually it will be a cycle like any other. What's different about this is just the massive amount of stimulus that kind of changes the calculus, and some of the old school sort of perspectives I'm not sure apply right now.
So a cautious optimism.
For sure.
In how things are happening.
I am optimistic.
Any verticals or markets that you see doing better than others?
Well, it's a great question. Our business is set up in verticals where we see, obviously, the technology vertical continues to do really well. A vertical that was really struggling broadly, healthcare. Healthcare, obviously, the pandemic started, healthcare was basically shut down. Then there was a lot of stimulus pumped into the healthcare system, and then that was withdrawn. I see healthcare coming back to normalcy. It's doing much better. And that was one of the areas I've been worried about. We have a real estate business. You hear a lot about real estate. We have very little exposure to office. I think fundamental changes in office. Office was overbuilt to start with. And I think these B and C class office buildings in central business districts, I think fundamentally there's been a sea change. I think there will be a fair amount of losses there. I'm pleased we have almost no exposure there. And then, multifamily, when we talk about multifamily, it's really apartment buildings. They continue to do well. We have, there's just not enough front doors you see it here. We drove from the hotel here. It's amazing, all the building. By the way, I don't know if you guys know this or not. This is I think one of the best business ecosystems in the country. You should give yourselves a hand. It's pretty remarkable. So many people, leave Salt Lake. They do great things. They come back to Salt Lake. I'll be meeting this afternoon with some of the funders that, as young people move back, are funding these businesses. I think all of you should be really proud of it. You guys have built a really great ecosystem that I believe is a bit unique. So you should feel great about that.
Thank you. Thank you. So you mentioned technology as one of those faster growing segments. How do you see technology influencing the banking industry over the next 5 years?
I think it'll influence the banking industry in a huge way. I personally think artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, is going to transform our industry. I'm spending a lot of time on it right now. We have 33 proof of concepts going right now, and I'm sure if 30 of them don't work, the 3 that do work are going to be game changers. And I think about, for example, people only call banks. It's not like anyone wakes up and says, I think I'll call the bank call center today. I'm bored. People call the call center when something isn't right. And I think the ability to train chatbots to really be able to solve people's problems and solve people's problems in a rapid way is going to be phenomenal. We're not there yet, and we're not going to get there. By the way, we have a bunch of call center employees here in Salt Lake. It's a great place to hire for us, really high quality call center people. But that's an area. Think about call centers and branches where it's a complex business. The problems are very differentiated. And to have the ability to have technology be able to help our teammates, help our customers, I think is going to be huge. Other places is fraud. I mean, one of the things that obviously AI really recognizes is patterns. The bad guys, I don't think they even sleep at night, so we've got to continue to invest to stay ahead of them. So I'm very, very, very optimistic on what AI is going to do for banking, and it's going to free up our teammates to spend more time talking proactively to our customers and solving problems. I think it's as big a game changer as the internet itself. I really believe that.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
And we have some great discussions later today where we'll talk about AI and some very tactical, practical ways that we can apply that in our businesses today.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't mean to interrupt you, but one of the things I talk to our team about all the time, Lincoln, is what I want to do is I want to find those applications that we can do at scale. There's a lot of really interesting, fun things to do with AI, but what I'm trying to do is figure out what are the critical areas where we can do a better job of serving our customers and help our teammates. And so that's the challenge. There's all kinds of people come to me with all kinds of ideas. I find them intellectually interesting, but they have to be commercially interesting too.
For sure. So you stepped into the helm in May of 2020.
That's right.
Right in the peak of the pandemic.
Yes.
And we had payroll protection programs taking place. And even last year, we had the landscape of bank failures, most notably Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
We'd love to learn. You've got a room full of executives. We'd love to learn a little bit more about leadership and some of your experiences there.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. And I don't think anyone has a lock on leadership, but to your point, I certainly, I think as leaders, we all have to learn every day, and I certainly have learned a few things since May of 2020. First of all, broadly, I always think of leadership is having a vision that you can communicate simply, that you can get people to rally around and move in that direction. And so I think that holds true at any time. But the couple instances you mentioned, then that's great. And, we sit down with our board, we go off-site, we have our strategy, it's targeted scale, I could go all into it. But things happen, and things happen in business. The pandemic, it was unprecedented. You mentioned PPP. I'll just brag for just a second because it goes to what I think is required of leadership when things change. And so obviously for all of us, the world changed completely when we locked down everything. By the way, lessons learned, I don't think that was probably a good idea in retrospect, but that's neither here nor there. So the PPP came out, and so PPP, and I'm sure many of you participated in it, the demand was incredible. Everyone thought in the beginning it was a finite resource, and obviously debt forgiveness is another form of free equity, so there was a fair amount of interest. I had people knocking on my front door because remember, everyone was trying to get in the queue. Everyone was trying to figure out how do you get PPP. We, in the first round of PPP, and that's really what matters because everyone thought it was a finite resource. Ultimately, it wasn't. In the first round of PPP, I think we were the number 4 in the country in terms of getting PPP loans out. So what did we do and what did we learn differently? What we did is we assembled our team and we said, this is our priority. Our clients have a unique opportunity to get free equity, and we're going to do everything we can to help them do it. And so I assigned 2 people to do it, and we met every morning at 6 in the morning and every morning at 6 at night. Like, here's what we're going to work on today. Here's what we're going to fix. Here's how we're going to communicate with our customers. And so I just think one of the lessons in leadership is when something happens that's a sea change, I think get the whole team together and figure out first how you're going to communicate to your team and then how you want your team to communicate very succinctly and directly to their team and most importantly, your customers. And I was just immensely proud. We did the same thing, by the way, when the 3 banks failed. And in response to the 3 banks failing, by the way, the Fed came out with a whole series of proposed rules, none of which have yet to be implemented, but they came out in July. And the answer was banks need to have more capital. What happened was idiosyncratic to those 3 banks and had nothing to do with capital, but that was the response. And in some instances, it would have required, if they would have been implemented as proposed, and they're not going to be, and they still haven't been implemented, like 20%. So immediately I got the whole team to get, first of all, let me give you a little inside baseball on that. This is kind of interesting. Someone called me on Wednesday before SVB failed Friday morning and said, and it was a very senior person at a bank in New York, and they said, have you seen the deck? And I said, no, I haven't seen the deck. I'm like running my business. I don't like read other people's decks during the middle of the day. So he said, well, I'm going to read it and I'll call you back. And he called me back, and it was clear that SVB was losing deposits. And they were losing deposits before they blew a hole in the ship by selling a bunch of bonds at a discount and before they tried this equity raise that was going to then patch up the hole in the ship. And so I got the whole team together, and I said, brace yourselves. This is going to be a wild ride. And so that whole weekend, we started that day and then through the whole weekend figured out how to communicate with our customers. But again, what is, I think, the key when you're leading through something that is unexpected and something that's a crisis is you have to be very clear and over-communicate. And that's what we did. And we put together a strategy where we would basically raise capital by shrinking our balance sheet because there's a couple ways you can raise capital. You can either go issue equity, or you can shrink in banking, you can shrink your balance sheet. So I guess a couple things. Leadership is having this vision and getting people to follow along, but also when the world changes and the switch flips, you literally have to tear up the script, so to speak, and say, okay, right now we're going to do this, and Lincoln, you're going to do this, and you're going to come back and see me at 6 in the morning. You're going to do this, and just keep iterating and always communicate. I think in the absence of communication, when there's a crisis going on, people will make up, or they'll, everyone's getting a bunch of information. So I just, those are the lessons. I think one is, in the ordinary course, be able to have a clear vision that everyone can rally around, and when it changes, have the courage to say, the world has changed. We're going to now rip up that script. We're going to focus on this now. This will pass, but we got to deal with it, and we got to deal with it now. And it ties in really with kind of the whole notion of the easy way out or the right way out. Here's the situation we're faced with. Let's make a decision and let's go.
And bookending those days. So we have cultures that are very meeting averse, and yet you're saying in a crisis, the importance of communication may require morning to communicate what are we going to do, how are we going to execute today, and then a follow-up at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I specifically said I don't want any of these meetings to be more than a half hour. So, and I had 2 people that were assigned to run it, and they would put together an agenda, and I'd say, we can only deal, we're looking at the next 12 hours. Here's what we're going to do in the next 12 hours. And it worked really well. And I think the teams really can relate to it. I'm always amazed if you're very direct with your clients and you're very direct with your teammates, what people are willing to do if they understand what you're trying to accomplish and understand kind of, okay, and if we do this, then what?
Right. And in fact, you bring up a great point that the internal communications sometimes need to be a little different than how and when we communicate externally. Any best practices that you've learned in terms of how do you make sure that you manage those external communications with your clients and keep them well informed?
I think you have to be very consistent. And I think you have to be, and what we always do is, here are the 5 talking points, and then we push out the 5 talking points, and then we say, any client that has a question, have, technology's great, have kind of, open office hours. Any client could ask any question they wanted, because, in the financial crisis, people were justifiably worried. It was, so. And what I use just internally, I like to use a lot of really short videos. I don't think people read memos much, and if you push out a short video frequently, I think that's how people like to consume information, and it's an easy way, I think, to deliver information.
The local version of a YouTube short.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outstanding.
I mean, it's very similar to your opening remarks today. A great story with that ties into an important message.
Well, thank you. So you operate in an incredibly regulated environment. You mentioned before we came out that you spend a lot of time in D.C. And with a large organization in a heavily regulated environment, that could be tough to foster a culture of innovation. As you've brought your leadership to this organization, we'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do to help drive innovation in your business.
Sure. I think innovation is very, very important. And so as it relates, for example, to AI, what I've done is every 2 weeks I have another leading AI person come in and talk to our senior leadership team. So I think part of innovation is an outside-in perspective, because you know what you know, but what you don't know is what maybe you should know. And so outside-in perspective. The other thing that I think is really important with respect to innovation is we buy a lot, and I'm really proud of this, we buy a lot of entrepreneurial businesses that we integrate into our business. And a lot of big companies really, and everyone struggles with it, but I modestly think we're good at it. And when you buy these businesses with these pods of entrepreneurs, they change the way people think. They, by definition, now the one thing you have to be really careful as leaders is when you bring them into the large organization, you don't try to bend them into the large organization and destroy the very thing that you just paid a premium for that you thought was unique.
Right.
But we bring in people from the outside. And then your good question, Lincoln, as it relates to regulators, one of the reasons I'm in DC a lot is I don't want our people, our teammates, to have to deal with we are in a very regulated business in a very regulated time. But what we try to do at the most senior levels is we deal with the regulators and we free up our people to be out there innovating and serving our clients. Because if you're not used to dealing with it, it obviously can chew up a lot of time.
Well, it's a delicate balance, I would say, between adhering to the regulatory requirements, but carving out that space so that they really can apply creativity and come up with novel new approaches to take care of clients and solve the market needs.
Right. And by the way, the regulators play an important role. I mean, when you get into banking, it is a regulated industry, and that's just part of it. And safety and soundness of the system is very important for our entire country. So I'm not dismissive of it, but I think you have to figure out how to effectively make sure. And the big thing about, and this goes in all of your businesses, it takes so many fewer calories to do it right, to set it up right, to have the right processes and systems than it does if, in fact, you kind of get sideways and you have to stop everything and get it back on track. Much easier to just invest the money and do it right up front in terms of processes and procedures.
That's a great point. So as you think about, some organizations really choose to go down the path of, we can solve this, we can figure it out, we can learn on our own pace, versus how do we find somebody who has already solved it and bring it in? How have you found weighing between learning it on your own versus bringing in experts to help solve it for the organization faster? How has that influenced your career?
So I kind of have two different perspectives. One is we think about the front end of our business out serving clients. I like the idea that we're figuring it out, because if everyone could do it, there's 4,000 banks and there's nothing unique, right?
Right.
But when it comes to middle and back office, I'm not interested in being the pioneer on some new system. I want to figure out what's been done before, what's been tested, and what's tried and true, and put those in. So I kind of have a dual perspective on that. One is how we're out serving our clients and delivering on their unmet needs, and the other is middle and back office. I want systems that are tested, that other people have done, that have reputable people that have dealt with the same conversions, the same integrations. I'm a big believer. There's so many talented software companies in a perfect world. What I always tell our people, let's find the best system and let's take it out of the box and install it. One of my great frustrations, having done, and I've led large integrations, is everyone, you get a new system and everyone wants to modify the new system so it looks and feels just like the old system that you're ripping out that they didn't like. And you got to watch that. That's human nature.
So what I hear you describing is, I think part of that leadership component is also being able to articulate what is our core competence versus what is not. What is our differentiating factor? And how do we make sure we allocate our resources to those things that will really help us stand out in the market, not getting mired down in solving problems that may already have been solved on some of these other non-core or non-strategic functions?
I think that's well said. I agree.
So we have an incredible partner who has a podcast, the Real F Word, who focuses on failures and how failures shape us as entrepreneurs, as leaders. And it's a really open dive into these experiences. We would love to hear, over your years, I'm sure you've had both highs and lows. We'd love to learn a little bit more from what have you learned through some of the failures you've encountered, and how has that made you a better leader today?
Sure. Well, I always tell our people, I don't think you learn anything from success. I mean, if you think about it, when you have a lot of success, you bet right, you get the right people, it works, and there's really not that much to learn from it. I think in business, everything that's learned is learned from failure. And I think if you kind of take that perspective, then the first thing you got to figure out is when it goes off the rails, readjust and readjust. In business, a lot of things go wrong, a lot. And I've had many failures. Most of my failures I would put in the category of hiring the wrong person, putting the right person in the wrong job, and then the corollary to that is not fixing it fast enough. Because you know, and if I talked to each of you individually, you could come up with 2 or 3 of these instances. Like when you make a mistake in terms of people, you know it, and you probably know it within 3 to 6 months, and you probably don't do anything about it for at least a year. And that's a huge opportunity cost. Those are the biggest mistakes that I've made. Other mistakes I've made, I mentioned that I'm really proud of our ability to buy these entrepreneurial businesses and successfully integrate them. Our record's not 100%. There's one particular deal that I thought everyone wanted to be part of something larger. And it's also, the other thing is, it's just when you have a group of people that have a significant liquidity event, you never know how they're going to react. Some people, if they make $100,000, go off the rails. Some, if they put $100 million in the bank, suit up the next day and want to play hard. And I've missed on some of those. One of the things most recently that we missed on as a bank was this hiking cycle. That's billions of dollars. This cycle where it was transitory, inflation was going to get under control. Obviously, if you had thought that to be the case, you would have been asset sensitive and you would have benefited from the steepest rise in interest rates. We like most banks hardly played that perfectly. So that's a mistake that we made. And obviously what you do is you regroup, you basically restructure the balance sheet and you move on. So I think the big overall thing that I would share with people is don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid fast to admit that it kind of goes back to the story I talked about earlier. We have this magnificent strategy, and then the pandemic hits. The strategy just wasn't applicable. And I think, is that a failure? I don't know if that's a failure or not, but it would have been a failure if we hadn't ripped up the script and said, okay, we're going to focus on PPP. We're going to focus on serving our clients. We're going to focus on keeping our employees safe. We have 1,000 branches throughout the United States, and we have a bunch of ops centers. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thank you. So resiliency, I would say, is another word that has come up regularly as we look to your career as an example. What can you share with the group here as it pertains to resiliency, right? We face things every day that challenge our original thoughts, our original thesis, and being resilient is a core attribute.
I think resiliency, assuming that people know what they're doing and they work hard, resiliency is the number one determinant, I think, of individual success. When we're talking about putting somebody in a major job, the first thing I always think about is, are they resilient? Because bad things happen. It's just part of life. It happens in your personal life. It happens to the country. It happens to your company. And I think the notion of being resilient, and all of you have seen it, you really find out a lot about people when things go really wrong and you need leadership. And I just think as you think about putting the right people in the right jobs, I would highly recommend that you put resiliency and teamwork right at the top of the list. If you have both of those things, and obviously any job that any of you are considering putting people in, they're obviously competent and can do the job. I think the ability to be a team player and the ability to be resilient, and I've seen it play out, to Lincoln's question, I've seen it play out a lot over the last 4 or 5 years. And people that are truly resilient and team players will amaze you every time because they just don't flinch. They're like, okay, so this is the straw man of the day. We'll knock that one down and then get up tomorrow and deal with the next one.
Well, thank you. Chris, this has been an incredible opportunity. We couldn't thank you enough for coming and spending some time with us here this morning. You've had an incredible and exemplary career. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences, your wisdom, and hopefully we can each take some nuggets from this conversation and apply it into our businesses right away.
Well, Lincoln, it's a privilege to be out here with all of you. As I said, that you guys have built an incredible business climate. Now you've got, I guess, an undefeated NHL team, which is another nice thing. So keep up the good work. Great to be with all of you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lincoln. Much appreciated.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.